So there's a huge debate raging around remote work. Some people say we need to be in person and that's where the magic happens. And other people think that it's totally unnecessary, especially for Gen Z. And we're going to talk about that. It's coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea. This is the HR Hub, and on the show you get expert insight into anything related to HR. Please subscribe to the show or podcast. Keep learning from my guests. So today my guest is Kaleem Clarkson again. Kaleem is the COO of BlendMe, and they consult around remote and hybrid work. I found him through a fancy AI search, and his was the first name on the list, and said he was an expert and speaker on the topic, which after our last interview, I discovered was true. Hi, Kaleem. How are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
I am excellent. Looking forward to this. And really,
thanks for having me back, by the way.
Yeah, no problem. You know, this debate rages in my household, actually, around remote.
Ooh.
I was listening. My husband is a big remote work proponent, but I was listening to a book recently by the Why guy, the guy who wrote the book Why. What's his name?
Don't put me on. It's not Simon Sinek, is it?
Yeah. Simon Sinek.
Oh, okay, cool.
Simon Sinek advocates for in-person, and so we're going to dig into this today. So first question, though, and I'm going to start with that opposite perspective. Why are employers objecting to remote work, and why do they want to bring their employees back?
I think right now, if you were to survey employees, we're talking 70 to 80% want to be at least some part remote.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question directly, it's hard. I mean, the reality of the situation is that managing people remotely is hard. And a lot of people, a lot of organizations are built upon a framework that we've all been used to for 100 years, so it's easy to be accountable for certain things when you see the person. Okay, they're here, so then therefore they must be present. Now, we all know how many people are watching March Madness during their office hours. I mean, I think there's a stat out there for how much money is lost during the Masters in the United States. So everybody's at work watching the Masters. So being in person does not necessarily mean that you are present. It means you are physically present, but how productive that is. So I would say there's no doubt that leaders are faced with a ton of pressure right now, especially big companies who have to deal with shareholders. They have to deal with public image. There's a lot of things that go into their decision-making that maybe a smaller startup or smaller business doesn't have to deal with. So, again, it's speculation. I don't have any data to point to in this moment, but you have to ask yourself if companies like Dell, for example, Michael Dell, who has been a pioneer and a champion for remote work for the longest time, they recently put out their hybrid policy, which includes that you cannot be promoted to a new position or promoted up if you elect to be a fully remote employee. Hearing that news was a little disappointing, just knowing how much I respect Michael Dell and respect what Dell has done for workplace flexibility over the years. But again, there's a lot of other pressures that come to running a major corporation like that. So you have stock prices, plummeting. I believe their stocks are down. Yeah. So you have stockholders. So people want to know, why are you having those losses? And remote work is a pretty easy scapegoat. Everyone's distributed. We can't be as innovative. We're struggling connecting. It doesn't feel the same when we need to buckle down. So I think a lot of it has to do with the difficulty of managing remotely, and also learning something new is really difficult. So, I empathize with them, but at the same time, I believe we've all learned something over the past, now, 4 years, that people aren't really standing for this. We just want to go back to the way it used to be. So I would say mostly change in the difficulty of managing people remotely.
Why should we all go? What's the case for going remote? What's the case for being in person?
I do believe in person is a critical component, maybe even more critical in a remote work setting than just an everyday on-site setting. So, back to your question, what are the advantages to being remote? Well, I think if you want to talk about access to talent, you can now hire from various demographic markets. You're not just stuck to a location-based recruitment placement. And that can help an organization in a couple different ways. It can help an organization cover maybe a time clock based on time zones. So you could have people working in Australia. You can have people working in, basically a 24-hour time zone. And if you're a startup and you're a SaaS company and you need a customer service department, geez, it's much easier to hire maybe 5 people and you're covering the globe. Inclusion and diversity, I think that's a major impact. If your strategic goals are to be in a more inclusive workplace and to be a more diverse workplace, there's no better tool than remote work to do that, right? Like, so now you can hire more people with disabilities, for example. So now we're not just talking about, racial diversity, we're also talking about the way people are physical diversity. So yeah, there's lots of advantages there. And then, there are some economic advantages, right? So where you're hiring your people, how much they are being compensated. You no longer have to hire people from high cost areas such as, San Francisco or New York. You can look in the Midwest, you can look in Canada and hire some people who are just as talented, but maybe they live in an area where lower cost of living is there. And then last but not least, you have office space. I would say a lot of high level executives and people, especially in the commercial real estate market, are really kind of nervous about as far as what's going to happen with all of these. And that's like another factor to talk about. What's going to happen to all of these office spaces? Because a lot of these leases are coming up. And if we're implementing hybrid work, we're realizing we may not need as much space in one location. Maybe we're having more satellite offices potentially, or maybe we're building more space to fly people in. But overall, we're seeing a drastic decline in the amount of working office space, like for you to do your heads down work. So I would say that is 100. Those are the advantages of remote work, and the disadvantages: social connections. I mean, we can get close. Like, we've met each other a couple times online. I feel like I'm getting a good vibe, but like, I don't know what type of perfume you're wearing. I mean, maybe perfume you're wearing, right? But let's just say maybe you're wearing patchouli, and I can't stand patchouli. No, listen. If you wear patchouli, it's fine. Just like when you wear too much of it, it's a lot, people. You know what I mean? If you put too much, if you dab too much on, if you wear patchouli, just go really light because it's heavy. It's really a heavy scent. Okay. So what I'm saying is you can't substitute being in person. And I would say connection 100% is the downside to remote work. So what do you have to do? Be intentional about your connections.
Can you comment on creativity, innovation, teamwork, collaboration, and how that might be better? I'm not saying it is, but might be better in person.
There's opportunities for you to optimize those things remotely. You could still get pretty high level creativity and innovation done remotely. There's plenty of companies that are fully remote. You have GitLab, you have Zapier, you have Atlassian. So these are companies with like really big projects that are very, very complicated, and they're excelling at getting it done, right? So you can get pretty far. But for those real complex problems, I'm sure if you were to reach out to Zapier or Atlassian or GitLab, I'm sure they're going to say, hey, when something is really, really major and we need quick iterative feedback, we try to allow them to get together in person, maybe in small teams, because that is really in my opinion, the biggest advantage of being in person when you're talking about innovation is how quick you can get that feedback in real time. There's no friction. There's no technology in between you and I when we're in person. Now, to say, is that better than than doing it remotely, I'm going to go on the side of saying no, because every person is different. Some people, and this has been proven a lot as far as the
Oh, yeah.
water cooler talk and
Yeah.
innovation, not so much, not so much. Everybody wants to say this is, no, it's been proven before. Some people need time to think about the problem that they're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Some people who are more introverted need to have the question provided to them in an asynchronous manner
Mm-hmm.
and allow them to really think about it to provide their
Mm-hmm.
creativity.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's more about how can we implement both? I don't necessarily think one or the other is going to, have better results. I think the combination of both are going to achieve better results. This is a mind shift. We have been so attached to hours. Hours is a challenge. We have made hours the measure of productivity and work for so long. It's difficult for us to even get out of that mindset.
Any advice on how to get out of that mindset?
I don't have any specifically, because we still kind of measure things in chunks of time ourselves, but we bill based on value. We don't bill hourly just to bill hourly, right? Like we're billing on a concept. So I think value-based pricing, kind of like the old story goes, you don't pay a plumber comes in and fixes your house in 10 minutes, and you're like, how am I paying you, $800? It's like, look, you're paying for all those years of expertise that made me get it down to 8 minutes. And I think with freelancing, I think with the gig economy, a lot more contract work continues to soar every single year. I think we're moving towards a society based on value.
The cons of remote work, how do we address it? Like you talked about the primary con being social connection. So if you want to be in remote, how do you create social connection in a remote workplace?
We talk a lot about the responsibility falling on both the employer and the employee. When you're talking about the premier employee experience, we have it rooted in two principles: trust and responsibility are both things that both the employee and the employer have to have in order for the remote employee experience to be the most optimal. So when you talk about responsibility, we firmly believe that a lot of the responsibility and connections should be the employer's responsibility. Okay. And it should be like, listen, if we're going to embrace this work model, we know that we have to provide you with all the tools, the technology tools, the policies and all of these things. But we also have to look at connection, because we know it's the most negative part. When you look at Buffer's state of remote work, they've been doing it for years, since 2016. When you look at that and you look at the struggles that people struggle with remote work, they all deal with connection at some way. Loneliness, difficulty collaborating across time zones, difficulty communicating between teams. Like when you add them all up, it accounts for nearly 60% of all of the challenges in remote work. So the employer needs to be really intentional about why they're bringing people together. We call it a social connection strategy. So what is that going to be? We always like to say, start from the biggest event backwards. Okay, so you're going to have a big annual event where you're bringing the whole company together. Let's start with that. Yeah. Well, A, do you have the budget for it? If you don't, okay, well, let's move down. Are you going to let the teams come together regionally or by teams? What types of events are you going to do to get them together? Are you going to always just make them physically get together? Or are you going to try to throw in a few different virtual events, maybe a little, some less virtual events, because we're always talking in these meetings, but like there are ways for you to kind of implement those. And then like, okay, what can we do to get our employees outside of their offices remotely into the community? Like, do we give them a resource of meetups for each industry? Do we get them out into their communities? Do we get them speaking to clients that we may have? Maybe there's cross-team collaboration where an engineer is working with a client on a project, but a salesperson just happens to live in that area, and maybe they can go meet with the client with the engineer. Like there are so many different ways. Trainings, should we send them to conferences? All of these different things are ways that you can get people together, and it just comes down to building a plan and really sticking to it. So we call it a social connection strategy. We also have a social connection calendar. But yeah, that's what we suggest. Now, to the employee, you got to get out there and do your own. You have to take on some responsibility yourself, right? And that's where we would say, look for some lifestyle connections. We separate these connections in 3 buckets. Lifestyle, so like friends, family, things that you want to do, things that you like. Professional connections, your mentors, your professional associations, and then intimate connections. So it could be a partner. It could be, we consider religion like a really intimate relationship thing. Even politics can be intimate, I guess, if you think about it that way. It's like a personal thing, real close to you. So think about where you can fill your cups in all 3 of those, because you need all 3. You need all 3 of those connections. So as an employee, as an individual, you just have to be aware, and you have to say, hey, I've been sitting and working in my spot for weeks at a time. I haven't gone to a local meetup. So that's what you have to do.
Can you give us some examples of what works? Like you talked about creating a social connections calendar or something like this. And what have you seen that works? Like just generating ideas for the audience here on what a good social calendar would look like.
I mean, I think some of the best ones are web-based, where the whole company, like somewhere online that your company can view of different types of events that are available. I've seen that work very well. Like this is where the company's going to be. Like maybe you're volunteering, maybe the company's volunteering or so yeah, we've seen the best results when it's something shared and it's visible that people can kind of opt in and opt out. There's a lot of intranets happening these days for companies. I think an intranet is really important for remote workers. A place that your employees can go to get different information, like your policies, procedures, standard operating procedures, etc. Well, also where you can connect should also be in that intranet, that home base of source of resources. Volunteering is another one that's just really great. I think volunteering allows people to contribute to a cause outside of work. And then offsites, we're a huge believer in offsites. I mean, I think, when you're planning a retreat and you're planning an offsite, you have a lot of control over how people can interact. We think people should film them. I think you should definitely film your offsites and, show off what it's like to be at your company. I think those are really cool. And then, the low cost things, getting teams together in their local regions and like hosting meetups. Like if you have an office, because a lot of companies have, satellite offices or regional offices, getting involved in industry. So you're a development firm, hosting a local meetup that some of your employees are actually hosting on sales maybe, or hosting it in an industry area like development or design or product. That also is a way for your employees to kind of connect with other people outside of the company. Maybe get some sales too, but also just feel connected to their profession.
Do you see as HR, or I think you call it people operations, what do you see as our role in all of this? What should we be doing?
It should be a collaborative effort, 100%. You can't build a great employee experience siloed just in the HR department and not have representation and input from all throughout the organization. So we have to We have to clearly state that it is an organizational wide effort,
Right.
but I would say when you do this type of shared governance, should we say, or shared leadership,
Yeah.
where it's like a
Yeah.
committee or something like that, the person accountable should be in human resources or people ops, in my opinion. Like the person leading it
Yeah.
should be.
The person,
Like
there's somebody who's got to keep the ball rolling.
right, and be held accountable for deadlines and making sure
Yeah.
the implementation's right.
Yeah.
Like it's great to have input and to get as many people,
Yeah.
involved. That's
Stakeholder
what you should do.
engagement.
Yes.
So how do you get the buy-in? And we're talking about remote work here or even hybrid. How do you get the buy-in of a skeptical leader?
We started Blend in 2013, and from day one, we kind of taken a stance of we don't want to be in that space. We don't want to be I told you, please, this is the data. Because what we're learning right now is it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Like there's so much data out there for any leader to just Google in seconds to find whether remote work is good or not. Like that, there is so much stuff out there now. Like it's amazing how much research and how many articles are out there about how you can actually do this better and how you can optimize it. Who are the best at like this research, there's remote work awards that are given out every year. Like there's a remote work conference, shout out to Running Remote, like that have some of the biggest brands out there, Zoom and like all sorts of companies. So like to me, we're just not in the business of convincing leadership. So I don't have an answer for that because like, we're just not doing because like the obvious answer to me is, show the, find the data, survey your, and then we've done this and this is what we do, like survey your people. If an organization says we need help improving our remote employee experience, we do a diagnosis. And what I'm saying, this diagnosis ask a lot of the same questions of like, how many days in office would you prefer? What's your biggest struggle? What's the biggest advantage to working remotely? So we'll work with companies who want to improve their experience, but to come in and try to convince leadership that, hey, we should go remote or we should go hybrid, that is not the business. We decided we do not want to be in that business because we've learned that executives in different companies have different motivations, and it has nothing to do with productivity. It has nothing to do about whether it can or cannot be done. So to us, it's a lot of wasted energy on HR professionals. But hey, I don't want to discourage you HR professionals. If you feel like you want to go out there and convince the employee, what I would do is you would assess the company and their employees so that you can get true data based on what the employees want and desire. Probably take a look at your financial numbers during the pandemic based on productivity, not necessarily revenue numbers, because some of those revenue numbers are skewed by supply and demand. So maybe productivity numbers. Some case studies of some well-named brands that are doing it. Plenty. Just Google quickly, Dropbox, Atlassian, I've already named a few, and present your case. And I think that's the best thing you can do as a remote work professional. Right?
Okay. So if someone wants to learn more about building a successful remote work culture, what would you suggest?
I would suggest going to Google and searching BlendMe Inc. I would say that that's the first thing that I would say. Go and search BlendMe Inc. Reach out to us so we can help you. The next thing I would probably start with, like, I feel like a lot of organizations, one of the biggest challenges is documentation and asynchronous communication. I think I would start there. Like if I'm an organization that wants to improve remote work, like what you're talking about, I think I would start with how you're going to be able to operate more asynchronously versus synchronously. So that means instead of instant communication like meetings, we have to have instant feedback right now. Being able to post a message in maybe a chat tool and let people respond when they feel the most comfortable. So getting into this documentation mindset and how we're going to use asynchronous communication is probably where I would start, because that's the beginning of habit change. Like you're trying to change a few habits, because right now our habits are, we need a meeting and we need synchronous communication in order for us to get our task, our job done and collaborate with others. That's a big wrinkle in remote work because, you know, people aren't always available. There's a lot of conflict that way. So that's where I would at least start.
Well, thanks, Kaleem. That was great. I'm thinking about the social connection strategy. I think that's such a good idea for making remote work go more smoothly. Kaleem referred to the increasing contract work, and I did a fascinating episode about that. And a link to that's right here. I also did another episode with Kaleem back in January, was it? And a link to that's right here. Thanks for watching out there. We will see you next time.